1.2 million households are waiting for one. The government's trying to get 300,000 of them built each year. And today, it announced plans to make it that bit easier.
You guys have had some pause on the development here, thanks.
The Prime Minister watering down regulations for those building homes near rivers in protected areas.
So that we can build whether it's...
Developers will no longer need to prove they can offset the pollution in waterways caused by their new homes to get the green light. As it stands, they're forced to invest in new wetlands and plant tree buffers to stop nutrients seeping into the water.
Well, today's announcement will unlock 100,000 new homes in communities where people want those homes to be built. That's fantastic for young first-time buyers. Also will provide an £18 billion boost to our economy and support tens of thousands of jobs. And we're able to do this because previously it was a disproportionate and poorly targeted old EU ruling that blocked these homes. Thankfully, we can now reverse that.
Home building has become a central plank of the Conservatives' electoral warm-up, and home builders welcomed today's move, saying the EU-era legislation was disproportionate and that farming, water treatment and sewage firms were the worst culprits.
So today's news essentially clears the way through planned changes to legislation, but it's still the case that new homes, which do provide some pollution into watercourses, very small amounts of nitrates and phosphates, it's still the case that the house building industry will take on, through conversations with government, its responsibilities to make sure that those loads are mitigated.
Labour today said the government was failing on both housing and the environment. Environmentalists, however, say it'll lead to more phosphates, nitrates and sewage in rivers like this one in Suffolk. What effect will the removal of this regulation have on the biodiversity of rivers like this one?
We're in one of the most nature-depleted countries on Earth, and this is only going to make things worse. It's going to add to the pressure that our wildlife and biodiversity in our rivers is under, and it's going to mean that we're at risk of losing more biodiversity than we already have. And we absolutely need things to be going in the other direction. We need less pollution in our rivers, and we need the government to be taking action to protect them and increase and restore biodiversity and wildlife.
When home builders say this is making it more difficult for them to build, I mean, that's got to be a good argument.
I think it's absolutely not the case that this is stopping house builders from building houses. What it's doing is giving them a way to mitigate the pollution created by building new houses by doing things that help to reduce pollution from other sources.
The government has promised to mitigate the environmental damage with £280 million worth of investment, mostly targeted at farming and water treatment firms, with extra grants for farmers to store slurry. Though critics argue it'll mean the taxpayer is essentially footing the bill for the pollution caused by developers.
Hello, how are you?
But the Tories are on a collision course with environmentalists and many of their own voters too. The tension between their focus on home building and ever more environmentally conscious rural voters stretched today once again.
Well, joining me now from Ludlow is the Conservative MP Philip Dunn, who chairs the Environmental Audit Committee, and in Bristol, Carla Denyer, co-leader of the Green Party. Philip Dunn, isn't this just going to advance the cause of those who say the Conservatives are the people who put more poo in the river?
Well, nobody's fought on this issue harder in Parliament than I have over the last 3 years, and my committee produced a seminal report a couple of years ago, many of the recommendations of which were taken into legislation to produce targets for water quality, air quality, and other things. So this is an issue which I feel very strongly, because I have a constituency interest as well. We want to make sure that our rivers are protected, but this measure is actually dealing with a very small part of it. It's dealing with the consequence of an EU Habitat Directive, which has been gold-plated by UK regulators and is preventing development in areas of special conservation status. So, for example, in the River Clun in my constituency, not a single planning consent has been granted in 9 years, and we're now seeing school rolls coming under pressure because there's nowhere for young families to move to. So by doing this measure, which is not actually, your previous correspondent was ignoring the fact that from November, every development will have to demonstrate a 10% biodiversity net improvement in order to get consent for their development. So it's not watering down across the board. It's dealing with a very narrow and specific issue that has led to problems in development in specific catchments.
Carla Denyer, is this their knee-jerk opposition to something that's actually quite sensible?
I think it's incredible that the Conservatives have looked at the situation, our toxic rivers, and concluded that what's necessary is less regulation to allow even more filth to flow into them. No, I don't think it's knee-jerk reaction at all. In fact, it's been a pretty unanimous reaction from environmental groups and local residents that are shocked all over the country that the Conservatives think this is an acceptable way to behave. Rather than weakening regulation at a time like this, we need firmer controls on private water companies and the hugely profitable house builders, who, by the way, have seen a massive increase in their share value as a result of the Conservatives' announcement, which I'm sure is not lost on the Conservatives, since many of their biggest donors come from that industry. We need to give local authorities the powers to require house builders, agencies and water companies to work together to agree solutions that properly dispose of and treat waste, and stop treating house building, which is important, and protecting our environment as enemies. We can do both at the same time.
Philip Dunn, how is Michael Gove claiming that more houses are going to be built, and therefore more people in more flats producing more waste, but that this nutrient pollution is going to go down, even though the rules are being scrapped?
Well, it's affecting a very small proportion of the houses which we would like to build. It's significant, but it's a small proportion.
But how is the pollution going to go down?
It was 74, it's now 62 local authority areas are prevented from consenting housing applications, despite the fact that they're in their local plan, because of this Dutch court case in 2008.
Yeah, no, I get that it'll mean more houses, but why will it mean less pollution?
Because the pollution that comes from extra houses is very limited in where it has been managed by the water treatment necessary to cope with the additional house building. So, for example, if you're adding houses to a village where there's an existing treatment plant, there will be no reduction in the requirement of the water companies to ensure that they can manage that treatment. And we put into legislation in this bill that's going through now that water companies will become consultees for development, so they will know what's coming. At the moment, they're not.
This is a slightly different point you're addressing.
Every 5 years,
and
the developers
has tonight been saying there is going to be less pollution. Is that true or not?
Sorry, I think we were talking over each other.
Yeah, no, I understand the points you're making about water companies, but the Secretary of State is claiming there will be less pollution, and I don't understand how. Is he talking nonsense?
No, because at the moment there is no development, okay, in these special areas, and yet the communities have to be able to grow and develop. So what will happen is that where in these special conservation areas there is an application, the local authority will, just as Carla's been calling for, will work with the developer, with water companies that have to deal with the effluent, to ensure that that effluent is properly treated. And that's why the Secretary of State, I think, is quite right in saying that this is not going to lead to specific, across-the-board increases in pollution. They will be dealt with through the planning process. But the difference is that instead of having to put the mitigation in place before the planning consent is granted, which is the reason that we have this blockage at the moment, because
taxpayers
of the
will pay
court
for it instead.
case. It can be done. No, it can be not taxpayers. It will be done as part of the processing of the application by the local authority.
Well, it will be taxpayers because it's going to come out of government funding. Carla Denyer.
No, that's separate. That's actually misconstrued, Krishnan. The taxpayer funding is to go towards agricultural pollution primarily. 225 million of the amount announced today was for reducing agricultural runoff of phosphates and nitrogen into our river systems, and that's very, very welcome. And that will be focused on these areas of special conservation.
Carla Denyer, do you believe that pollution is going to be reduced?
No, I don't. And also, Christian, I think you were exactly right to point out that, as is seemingly always the case with this government decision, this is a massive handout to developers. It transfers the cost of cleanup from the private sector to the public sector, so that corporations can keep making massive profits while the rest of us carry the costs. And that's why the Green Party believes that ultimately it would be best if we took water companies into public ownership, end the siphoning off of huge amounts of profits in the form of dividends and bonuses to CEOs, and instead ensure that those water companies are investing in the infrastructure needed to clean up our act nationally.
Carla Denyer, Philip Dunn, thank you both very much.